Well, hello there, and thank you for tapping into this episode of Bandwidth Coast to Coast. I'll sometimes from time to time wonder what life was like during one of the many technological revolutions that have happened throughout the course of time. Did folks know how connected we would become as a nation or a global species when the first telephone call was made? I think about that when I think about the Battle of New Orleans, of which Andrew Jackson won a resounding victory over the British after a peace treaty was signed. Words simply just didn't make it there in time to stop the bloodshed. Or another technology that's seemingly as innocuous as a stirrup for riding a horse. Whole cities worth of people were murdered, literally countries formed because of a simple invention of having a foothold on a horse, giving way for more armor on the rider, and what was essential to the precursor of tanks, heavy cavalry. What about the plow? Simple technology again in hindsight, but allowing for a single farmer to significantly increase the amount of land they can farm. Were the people back then chatting around with friends and family, musing about all the changes that would come about from the Normans having stirrups and the impact that would have on wars? Or how the plow would lead to greater populations in Europe, thus meaning a larger army available for conquest? Or how the telephone would mean that the pace of events, business, culture would all accelerate? Similarly, the acceleration that occurred with the printing press before it, and more contemporary times, social media. The funny thing to me about the time we're living in is many of the technology advancements we currently have come from iterations with information technology, something that has usurped the very concept of technology altogether. Like when I say I work in tech, people understand that as ones and zeros, when in reality, it would typically mean anything in the time of technology, from plows to belts, and has come to mean only information technology. And in that realm, consider for a moment algorithms, where we as users are unaware of the change when an advertisement on a web page was driven by an algo instead of a person. Or your Facebook timeline, when it was shifted from followers and time to another algorithm trying to steer you towards outrage. The vast majority of us were unaware of it, but the results from the revolution are nonetheless something that we're still reeling with. How we interact with one another has been impacted, and everything from the products we buy, people we talk with, interests we gain, hell, the very fabric of how we spend our time has changed. This brings me to the idea of blockchain, and the changes that blockchain is bringing the foundation of the web as we know it, subsequently called web3. A pretty significant, growing, but still small group of dedicated people are fundamentally rewriting how the internet is structured and interfaces with another through the blockchain. And the change that's coming is great, but with many of the information technology improvements, it's not as easy to get as a telephone or a plow, and is happening seemingly invisible. To me, and something that's come out of the conversation you're about to listen to, should you stick around for it, is the idea that blockchain and the smart contracts written to make the real power of it come about is providing a new open source syntax for people to exchange ideas. Put another way, because everyone can read the code and see how it's functioning, and from that create a function on the blockchain that has a set framework to do it, a language of communicating between systems, people, and even more revolutionary concept with blockchain economies is now emerging, which would mean that exchanging ideas across the globe, built up on a new network to do so, is emerging right out in the open, but seemingly underground, because many aspects of our current web would go out the window, like being able to erase data, such as the New York Times being able to alter or delete one of the articles that they own on their website. In Web3, you can do that, but there's a record of that change, a record that the single entity doesn't own, meaning the original content is still available. Today, it's not. Will NFTs become an asset that people will stack up early in life to later transform as an investment vehicle in the same way that 40 years ago, folks would purchase a starter home only to sell that home for one that fits kids and then sell that for their quote dream home. What changes would all of this and Web3 bring? Likely many. The opportunity ahead is vast. When and what, though, is only for time to tell. For this episode, you'll hear the second part of my conversation with returning guest Rowan Price. We go deep on all things Web3, centering mostly around another great podcast episode from Tim Ferriss's show, where he's talking with Naval Ravikant and Chris Dixon. I put the link to the show in the show notes, and I really suggest anyone who's interested to also dive into that episode. As Rowan and I talk, though, we go back and forth on a few things. Rowan, an alumnus of the early stages of the dot-com boom and bust, has a really novel perspective on the revolutionary moment in Web3. We talk about everything from what can be built on Web3, what NFTs are, smart contracts, why these are really novel advancements that are way bigger than just the headlines of some shitty JPEG fetching millions at auction. Before sliding into a concept that Rowan presents on how Web3 is really a Trojan horse for legacy companies to give legitimacy to Web3, while in essence sowing the seeds for their very destruction. While somewhere in the middle, Rowan asks me what I think about Web3 and if it'll make the rich richer, or if it brings opportunity to the less fortunate, before somewhere at the end closing on why everyone should be using the Brave web browser, not only for its native Web3 features, but lack of surveillance. Thank you as always for your time, dear listener. Thank you, Rowan, for recording with me. Hope this finds you well. Real quick before the episode begins, if you like what you hear, please tap that follow or subscribe button. You also can find this episode, all episodes in the series, or check out our Daily Minute podcast by visiting us at bandwidth.productions.
Excellent.
I really just jumped into it. I gave you barely any warning once I finally did it. Well, thanks again for part two, since we had to cut it short last time, both because of a client obligation I had and my bladder, which was about to explode. But
my pleasure.
Thank you again. And before we chat, I'm gonna try to not have you game this question, which is, in the past month, can you tell me a time that you've been truly content, like truly in a state of contentment?
Well, thanks for having me back, first of all. So if I were trying to game the question, I would say the state of contentment came when I was invited to the the Bandwidth Coast to Coast podcast. I'm invited back. I was like, this is so great. Yeah, I have to say, being a lifelong basketball player, I think the first day that I was able to get back out to the main City Park basketball court, I didn't play, but because I didn't have the right clothing, the right gear, which doesn't always deter me from playing basketball, actually. I think I've played in combat boots before, but just sitting at the edge of the court, just watching it, just being there, feeling good. People from all over. My acquaintance Bogdan from Serbia, 6'5", great arc on his jump shot. Hardly ever hits the rim, but he can drive to the rim, and he plays really aggressive. But no, it was that feeling of just, it was I kind of cheated, because to get to my contentment, I relied on the seasonality. So I relied on that spring day experience. But it was certainly a content a content feeling. It was it's the best one I can think of in the last month.
I like that a lot. It's okay to rely on the seasonality of things. That's probably means you're more in tune with stuff. And it's so funny that we've known each other since 2017. I think I figured out when I was thinking about this. It was either the November of 17 or like sometime between November of 17 and February of 18. And I know that for certainty it's within that range because of something I'll get into when we start actually talking about our topic that I'll make sure we get to this time. And I haven't seen you ever in person, which is funny. But
it's amazing.
Yeah, I know. But when we do, we got to play basketball because the two of us are both people who like to casually play basketball for our whole lives.
Definitely.
Which is a funny idiosyncrasy.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I think that another coincidence is that we met around a Web3 topic. I believe you had done a video diagram of blockchain, and I was like, that's cool. You made it so simple. And then we started talking about that, and
which is what I was thinking about. Yeah, which is what I was thinking about, which was ironic when I asked you to talk about this, and then when I was like prepping my thoughts to think about like things I wanted to bring up, I was like, oh shit, like we actually met because I did a little like a video of which was just like a cartoon essentially of just blocks being put together, explaining the consensus mechanism and why blockchain is uber secure, but then also how you can have it be not secure. But that was like the whole video of it. And then you commented on LinkedIn. And honestly, I don't exactly know from there what we talked, but I know I was doing like a series trying to get clients of just stuff about blockchain. And like I was doing it like a couple years too early because like Ethereum really hadn't taken hold. And there wasn't really like, a way to make it to cheaply develop with blockchain. There's still a way it's no longer cost prohibitive. Back then, it almost was cost prohibitive. And mostly it was because you couldn't figure out how long it would take to build something. But I was thinking about that, and that was really funny. And that's how I know it was between that November of 17 and February of 18, because that was like that was as long as I was doing those little videos.
That's right. Yeah, which another irony is we met on LinkedIn, which I consider to be a kind of a cesspool of an online platform, because most of the content is insults the intelligence. But I think probably every day there's something really brilliant said on there. It's just finding it, and someone who's really interesting saying something, worth listening to. So I just got lucky that day. So.
That's true. I try to use my LinkedIn for that. It's to varying degrees of unsuccessful, but I think all social media platforms are just varying degrees of cesspools. It's just how deep is this shit? Does it go up to your knees, or are you up to your waist, or where are you at? Like it's like Twitter, I think, is like nipple high of shit that you're wading through. Like, there's only some stuff at the top, and that's about it.
I quit using it. I used Twitter fairly heavily from like 2007 to 2010, and then I trickled down, and then I think 2015 I quit all socials. Then I rejoined LinkedIn, but I quit all socials, and I never really used Twitter since. So I actually don't. I feel like I'm probably somewhat underqualified to address the kind of day-to-day news cycle aspect of Web3 because I don't use Twitter. And I don't follow tech news very assiduously. Most of my knowledge comes from working directly with Web3 clients, like blockchain clients, NFT clients, that kind of stuff, crypto clients. And then I do some reading about it, and I listen to shows. You recommended a great show, a podcast interview with Tim Ferriss with a couple of domain experts that was really interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to pull that up because I want to make sure that I know one of them was Naval Ravikant, but I want to get the other
Chris
person's
Dixon
name.
And
Chris Dixon.
I think it was Chris Dixon, who's kind of a startup world heavyweight.
Yeah, you're right. Chris Dixon, sweet. Um, so yeah, I mean, we might as well just go into it. I mean, the conversation already steered that way, which is great. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I asked you to watch or listen to Tim Ferriss and Chris Dixon and Naval Ravikant, The Wonders of Web3. I'm like I told you, I'm not that big fan of Tim Ferriss. Um, I won't slam him too hard, but I'm just not the biggest fan of him.
He's gonna
But
listen to this, and he's just Anyway.
yeah, but some people at work were talking about this episode of this Web3 and how great it was, and that like was the final push after seeing that interview spread around quite a bit. That I was like, okay, like I feel like this is gonna be kind of just like a confirmation exercise, but I'll listen to it anyways. I guess that's an arrogant thing to think, but that's what I was thinking when I went into it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was for the most part. But what it really did was I was like, oh my God, they are very, and as a preface, if you can explain something to me simply and plainly, I'll probably give it the most amount of respect because that's like you really understand something, and you're
Yeah.
really trying to get it to be understood. And that whole episode was like that, very plainly, kind of laying out the problems with the current web architecture, and what there ways you can kind of game that versus what the potential of Web3 is. So it got me extremely excited, and honestly, I sent it to you just because I think it's an interesting exercise in decentralization, and kind of making things more anarchistic in a way. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that you would like it a lot for that. And then I
Yeah.
realized, and after I said like, "Hey, would you listen to this before we chat?" Then I realized the whole like we met because of blockchain, which is ironic.
All
Um,
right. Right.
so I'm just gonna like the first thing I wanted to tee it up with was what was the biggest takeaway when you think about that episode or Web3 in general? Like, did it spark something and give you like a new thought on this whole nebulous, esoteric, overly abused term of Web3?
Yeah. 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 Definitely. There's a couple things. One of them was how much how interested they both were, both Naval and Chris Dixon were in the concept, the notion of social contracts. And so they talked about, obviously they talked about the smart contract component of an NFT, which I'm assuming we'll either get into, or people might be fairly familiar with. It's kind of means what it sounds like it means. But what struck me was the idea that there's some kind of human inherent human responsibility that's enforced and encouraged through the use of exchanging value using, and they're talking a lot about NFTs in particular, but just using Web3 technology in general. So this idea that to do so requires some degree of um, positive social pressure. And I can't remember who it was. I think it was Chris, though, who gave the example of the kind of original big Web3 technology, which I think we could both agree is Bitcoin. I don't know if you agree with that, but
Well, yes, fundamentally, that is what gave us even the concept of the blockchain.
yeah,
Satoshi Nakamura's white paper, and then code push of Bitcoin is, I mean, of blockchain. Well, of Bitcoin, I guess. Yeah, it's synonymous. Didn't exist before that white paper.
absolutely, yeah. So yeah. So we're on the same page here. I think the only way you could detract from that premise is if you said we're not to Web3 yet, we're at 2.9 or something. But whatever, I think that, I mean, that's splitting hairs probably. So I think his concept was that we both agree when we perform activities related to Bitcoin, whether it's using it, whether it's exchanging a token from between one person, exchanging the access to a token from one person to another, or whether it's actually performing token mining, that we're assuming everyone who's doing this together is assuming that the tokens that we're working with have some value. And it's kind of like, I mean, he's making the same point about you can make about fiat currency, which is that there's this cooperative assumption and understanding that we share that makes it work. We both agree that money means something. That's easy. But to come to that agreement so rapidly and so quickly over something so new, that's different, and that's interesting. That was the big takeaway, that concept that it creates and enforces social contracts among people that in a new way.
That's fascinating to me. I get so practical with technology that I just get obsessed about how to build something with it. But that is fundamentally from a like user experience in the most purest sense of like, what is the soul getting out of it? What is a soul getting out of it? It is that exchange, which is really what all of like, I think about this when I think about like, just, I guess, in this concept of the 1, 2, 3, I guess web 2. But really what that just means is like communications technology, right? And I think about that, and sometimes I get a bit obsessed thinking about how all of what I do for a living is just passing information around, because that's basically what it is. Like you click something, something gets done, something gets, processed, it gets triggered into this other set of things. I mean, even like HTML and JS and CSS, when I look at a web screen, it's just little different bits of information of how colors and pixels should be aligned. Like that's ultimately what you're doing.
If you look outside yourself from the perspective of an alien who's just landed on Earth, and he looks at you and he looks at a customer service rep for Amazon who's in the Philippines working at a computer terminal, doesn't look that different. You're both just exchanging information through the terminal. It's just what is it?
Right. And even what the terminal is displaying is just exchanging information of what it should, what someone has said certain things should do. If it's how the web page reacts, or, the colors that are displayed on it, or like, clicking this button starts this event, which does like all of it is just information.
Exactly.
So
you decide what you want to put in and what you want to get out.
Yeah. And like, are you familiar with Brave browser at all?
Thanks to you, I am, yes.
Oh, okay. So the premise of anyone who's listening who doesn't know what Brave is, so all web browsers except for Brave, not all, because there's some like that are like really out there, but all mainstream you would know about or come up in casual conversation or see somebody use, are surveillance web browsers. And what that means is that they are watching literally everything you are doing, and it's getting reported to some degree of the people that site you're on, the people who have essentially a cookie, which is another form of a contract with your web browser that says, now that you've gone to this site, if you go anywhere else on the web, that is going to send that information to the site you went on sometime. So like if you go on Nike.com and then from Nike.com, you go all over the web route, since you went to Nike.com, it is now tracking you everywhere. And that is possible because of, protocols and the hardware or the software physically built into that web browser. So Chrome is the worst. I just recently found out and almost like flipped a bunch of tables, especially since the fact that went past me for so long, is that Mozilla is like no different now than Chrome. So Firefox is no different than Chrome, which is that it's sucking everything up and it's giving it away to advertisers or really anybody who builds a smart way to capture that information. Brave doesn't do any of that. It's built on the same. Oh, go ahead.
The DuckDuckGo mobile browser. What's your take on it?
Just throw it away.
I was a DuckDuckGo proponent until I realized that they were basically propagandizing, like determining what shows up in the newsfeed.
I saw that coming for a few months, but I didn't see that coming a year ago. So like their DuckDuckGo's is like, they were like, even, we're not tracking you. We're not doing that, which they're not tracking you. But the thing is that they are not okay. So let me close the thing on web browsers, and then I can come back to
Sure. Yeah.
DuckDuckGo if it
Sure.
comes up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't use DuckDuckGo. Brave actually has its own search engine, which is search.brave.com, or if it's native,
Okay.
if you use the Brave browser. And I encourage everybody to use that, even if you're not using the Brave browser. It's an actual search engine. DuckDuckGo is not. It is a database that tries to draw connections. And then fundamentally, if those connections don't come up with a good score, it uses Bing. Bing now uses Google. So you're actually still not getting away from Google if you use DuckDuckGo. It's just you're abstracting yourself
I
a
didn't
few
know
more
that.
things. Yeah.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
I knew that Yahoo used Bing. I didn't know that DuckDuckGo used Bing. I didn't know
Yahoo
that Bing
now
used
uses Google. All of it is Google. Bing is now Google.
Yeah.
If you search Bing, it's using some of the database from Bing legacy, but they signed a secret agreement, literally secret agreement with Google.
Google
and
has
it's
so
not
many
Google.
brands.
It's and the whole tech industry is very incestuous.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you use Brave browser though, the kernel of Brave is Chromium. Chromium is the same thing that Chrome is built on, which is what Google uses. It's very similar to say like Linux, like Mac is Linux, but it's its own version of Linux. Is the same as saying is like Chromium and Chrome. Like Chrome in this analogy would be Mac, and then Brave would be like I'm using Fedora, right? Like a different Linux distro. The reason I bring all of that up is there's something built into Brave. There's wallets and crypto is built into Brave. So it is a Web3 browser, which is very interesting. But they have this thing called a basic attention token, a BAT. And what it means is like if I open up a new tab, I can get a shuffle between this beautiful vista I'm looking at, or it could be an ad, right? And I'm allowing that. So I have it turned on, partially because I'm curious. So I get ads, and if I'm using the web browser, I'll get those little toast notifications that come up and give me an ad, right? So I am getting ads. But because I'm getting those ads served to me, right, and I turned that on, I'm actually earning tokens. So I'm earning these basic attention tokens. And it's about like $1 a token right now in the exchange. It's what they're worth. Okay. So I think like between all of my browsers, because I have so many devices, to be honest. I have like, on work, I have to use a Mac. And then absolutely, as soon as I can, shove that thing in a closet, I turn it off. And then I use my computer, my development computer, what I do most of my projects on, and some of my clients with, and that's Linux. I have a iPhone. That's my daily driver. I have another Linux phone that I'm shifting towards. I have a couple other like old Apple devices that I've like disconnected from the mobile internet, and they're only connected to like Wi-Fi. So I use one of those. So I have all of that. So between all of those different things, comprise like my actual search and internet experience, I have probably like 2 basic attention tokens in the past 2 months, right? So I have been about, I guess, like 1 token a month.
Because
so
all the devices are using Brave?
Yes. Yeah. So like I'm looking at my, work or my development machine, and I got like half a basic attention token through the month.
And these are actual Web3 tokens.
I could exchange it for what it is the value of, and the value of it is about $1. So the point that I bring it up is that, to your point, like the social contract, right? Like right now, the contract I have with Google, because Google is essentially owns the ad internet space pretty much, right? Or Apple in some degree, because Apple is, if I'm like searching something on my phone, it is serving me ads in search.
The ad internet space?
Yeah, Google owns it.
Yeah, Google and Facebook. Facebook has a large share too.
It's diminishing, but yeah, they do. It's mostly like Google. So they get to serve me whatever I want. I can never turn that off, right? If I'm searching on Google and I'm in that ecosystem, it's siphoning everything off of me that I don't know. It's siphoning everything I don't know about me. And it's serving really targeted ads. I don't know how much those ads how much are they actually spending those ads on, how much money they're making on me. I have no idea. But what's interesting is if you switch into this Web3 world, now all of a sudden it's commodifying my attention, and I'm actually becoming part of it. It's extremely small, but that's also because, I think Brave is like less than, it's probably 1% of people on the internet use Brave. It's not that big, maybe 2%. I really don't even think that. So it's small, the amount of people that are using it, which just means the economy is small on it. But if you were to scale it, to the same size of what Google is, like that would be massive, right? So then all of a sudden the ecosystem would build up, because most of the ads I get now are like crypto ads.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing with that is that you're now you're disconnecting essentially directly from this main feed of somebody else taking ownership of ad space, getting siphoned them, and instead saying you're now an active player in here. You have a wallet address, which means that's what we're gonna connect who you are. Is you're like actually giving us open protocol of who you are essentially. And then we're going to give you ads and then get in there. The other thing with Brave that's great is there's no personalization. So it's a crapshoot for advertisers as to like who you are and how targeted the ad can be.
Right. So the ads are served on based on the content,
essentially. Yeah.
As opposed to who you are, or your
right.
profile, or a picture of who you are.
Right.
Cool. I see. So it's a Web3. It's kind of like it's a Web3 approach to exchanging. It's exchanging value for your attention directly. Not that much right now, but I see. So, but it's also well, yeah. So it's giving you ads in exchange for your attention, as well as a Web3 token. Some
right.
kind of
right. Well, because there has to be some means of exchange, right? There has to be some information exchange, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, there has to be a value to it, which is this token, right? The concept of tokens is really the concept of exchanging value, right? So you're giving me something, I'm giving you something back. There has to be an equal exchange in order for the blockchain to work.
Yeah. You said you had a lot of devices too, and they're all using Brave. I wanted to ask you about that with respect to Web3. I think one of the criticisms, so listening to the podcast you recommended, the Tim Ferriss podcast with Naval and Chris Dixon, the cynical take is these three people are extremely wealthy, and they have access to information. They're wealthy and they're technically savvy. That gives them access to information, and they have capital to invest in Web3 assets, which may or may not be the point. I don't want to load the question. I don't want to like guide your answer, but it seems like you think about the fact maybe up to 58% of U.S. Americans are at or near the poverty line.
Is it really that high now? That's startling.
Maybe it's not that high. Let's say it's 28%, or maybe 58% is prediction.
It might be paycheck to paycheck.
Post-Ukraine war reality.
Yeah.
But whatever the number is, I mean, most people don't have the same access as these people who are, I don't think that these are the kinds of people that would want to deny anyone else access to Web3 assets. And I don't think that Web3 assets and wealth is the only point or the main point at all of Web3, or in terms of its potential. But how do you is that an issue with Web3? I think what we both like about it is it's supposed to decentralize. It can decentralize, and it can enable us to make agreements between one another with technical and social contracts, as opposed to relying on the centralized authorities and who enforce agreements with militaries and police and prisons and so on. But how do people access that? I mean, people without means. That's one of the issues right now. Like most people don't have access to Web3. It seems like through their device, partly through their hardware and mostly through knowledge. I think
it is. Yeah.
What do you think?
It's mostly knowledge. I mean, anytime, I think there's just certain fundamental truths that are, I don't think there's any fortune or misfortune or unfortunate, fortunate things to things that happen in time and developments. So I think one of the things that just happens that I think is just a truth is that new shifts in technological paradigms tend to mean that the people who are the wealthy or elite class prior to the technological development have an opportunity to either jump at the new technology and become, quote unquote, an early adopter. And depending on how much of their fortune, meaning the capital that they put into it, they could potentially have like massive returns, right? Like Carnegie, right? Like Andrew Carnegie is a great example of somebody who wasn't fortunate, didn't have money, but jumps in at the right time, which also is possible with new technologies. New technologies also mean, the optional development towards it. I think something that is, an unfortunate example of this is quantum computing. I think quantum computing, you have to have millions and billions of dollars in order to get involved in it. And it is such a massive leap forward as far as computational power, which then equates to, ability to do things that, for example, I don't think there could be an Andrew Carnegie of quantum computing. And I think quantum computing it has the potential to like fundamentally, just breed so much chaos and completely change the way everything is gone to a pretty alarming and scary degree. So that I think is an example where, you can't have an Andrew Carnegie, but if you have a Bill Gates that invests into it, they can own, the space, which would mean more wealth and more exuberance for that person. I think Web3 is kind of like honestly, I think it's a type of technology revolution that we've never seen before. And that sounds really hyperbolic, but what I mean by that is, okay, app development around 2012. Okay, mobile app development was huge. I was getting into tech. I've done some HTML coding before that I taught myself. I really want to get into, developing on iPhones. There wasn't that many resources for me to go and teach myself, right? There was maybe YouTube, but there wasn't that many YouTube videos. The idea of somebody who their job is creating videos and teaching people online with like Udemy or YouTube wasn't really that much of a thing back then. That was only 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So the barrier to entry was high, right? Meaning like, oh man, there's no format for this type of consumption that, I'm looking for. Like it was just getting out of the era of going to libraries to like, find books and research things. So the barrier to entry to like that, Web 2 world of, building apps and all that kind of stuff was quite high. I probably, if I, went into it, I could have, dove into API development and built different types of Web 2 apps on my own at that time than it was, just strictly mobile apps, right?
Yeah.
Even still, the ecosystem of knowledge around it wasn't quite there even 10 years ago. Where now what I think you have is you have the ease of anyone with a laptop can, even a Chromebook can develop an app now, right? That's possible. But, the fundamental difference with Web3 is, multifold, which is there's now an ecosystem of people that if you're interested and curious and aware of it, which means chance, that really means chance, right? Like the chance that you have a happenstance to brush shoulders with somebody if you're poor and not too mentally bogged down from your troubles and traumas, that you can like be open to that to be able to like go and do it, right? But I think there's way more of an ecosystem of being able to get tapped into it. Building on Web3 means you're building something decentralized, which means your network layer kind of goes away. And you just have to learn how to write to a shared network as opposed to having to stand up that whole infrastructure yourself. You still probably will have to do some of that in order to like make it work for whatever it is that you're doing, right? So I'm incredibly hopeful, most hopeful for people who are like younger, which is why anytime I meet somebody that's younger, I always try to get them interested in Web3 and developing in some degree. Because even if you don't want to be a coder, understanding it is going to be like fundamental to, maintaining flexibility in the economy going forward. But and then there's also that ecosystem of, I'm going to go watch these videos, I'm going to understand these concepts, I'm going to go run through a couple hello world, development exercises. And then you could build something. If it's something of value, you could potentially start making money on it, right? Because it's tokenized, and you can, subscribe, you could write it on a chain like Ethereum or Polkadot or Chainlink. And then, you eventually will have to put some money into it in order to write transactions, but there's many ways in which you can try to, collect money through mining or staking or all of these different types of things. Like I'm
Sure.
incredibly hopeful that, you will have some people like Tim Ferriss, or Chris Dixon or Naval, who invest early in things and become like fantastically wealthy. But unlike other things, especially nowadays, where it takes either a lot of time, or a lot of, energy or a lot of effort, Web3, allows you to be able to do something. Okay, so here's another example. I know computer vision very well, right? Like I could develop you an app in computer vision. That you need to have a good computer. You need a good computer to be able to do training. And if you don't have a good computer, you can do stuff with the cloud, but then you're going to have to pay money, and it's going to be fantastically expensive. You have to collect data sets, which you can either download data sets online, you can download YouTube videos and collect it yourself. But then now that means time, and you're going to need a lot of it. You're going to have to sift through it, or you can generate it yourself, which means you're going to have a camera. And then you're going to have to set up the right occurrences, which means time and money. So like all of those things have a higher barrier to entry than just saying, I'm going to build a really cool novel app that solves something on Web3. And I mean, like it's grasping at error as far as like some of these applications of what that could be. I could riff and tell you some that, that are like examples that I use, but that is to say, any new technology, you have to solve problems. The iPhone, people weren't thinking of having an app that tracks your running and tells you your running splits, but now you can have that on there. Someone just has to think of it, and I think there's opportunity for that. Web3. It was a long and hopefully right answer.
No, that's a good answer. Like, and I think it's accurate. You need some luck, and you need some modicum of capital, but you don't need to be fantastically wealthy to access the potential of Web3. I think something that is maybe heartening to people looking to break into the world too is there's this thread that goes back to Web 1.0 and 2.0, which is the open source world. And something that's, as you know, John, something that's really cool about the open source world. I know a lot about one particular project called Drupal, which is kind of like an enterprise web CMS framework and software product. Drupal also has its own social contracts, and they're all kind of referred to collectively as the quote unquote Drupal way. And it's the way you communicate with each other, and the way you talk about things and do things, and how you define terminology together. And what's true of Drupal and many other open source projects, from Fedora to the original Apache web server, also open source, is that there's this sense of community, and I think that's there with Web3 too. I mean, the most visible place is you go to Twitter and you see the NFT creator community, because they're super visible and loud, and the sentiment there that I think is naturally occurring, because there's no real central leader of the NFT movement, right? It's just happening organically, but there is certainly the sentiment that we're a community, we're in on this together, and we're going to help each other. And yeah, maybe some of that's bullshit, but it's real. Actually, most of it is real, even if some of it's bullshit. So and I think that comes from open source. And I think Web3 draws on open source insofar as it's decentralized, because even with the architecture of blockchain, it mimics the typical open source project, where you've got the core code base for a given. So for Drupal, there's a core code base. There might be thousands. There's probably millions of instances of that code base existing all around the world, because it's free. You can download it to your computer, and it's also composable, right? Like you can add modules and pieces. Same with WordPress. WordPress is also an open source project that's composable, and that's a part of Web3 too. There's a lot of parallels between open source and I would even say that Web3 builds on the open source tradition. I
Well,
think
it is.
an
It's open
essential building
source.
block of
No,
it.
I mean it is.
It is
Yeah,
open source.
it's synonymous. Yeah.
It's synonymous, but I guess what's interesting is that open source really was a huge driver of Web 2 and Web 1. I mean, a huge, like if you look at WordPress, I think it's 1 out of every 3 or 4 websites on the planet is a WordPress website. So it's, it's Apache, maybe, also a huge percentage of total websites served by Apache, et cetera. So
if you took out open source, you'd have no internet fundamentally. So like I mean, I can say that definitively because I mean, okay, Chrome web browser is open source. Chrome that you download from Google isn't open source, but its basic kernel, what it's built on top of, is Chromium, and that's open source. So there's one tick, but also any website that you're being served is like a large amount of them are on Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services runs Linux. It's built with Linux. Linux is open source. I mean, Linux, people just think of it as like a shitty desktop solution, but it's not, and it's also way more than that. It's Linux has come in hard now with like the containerization and just cloud services behemoth of the world we live in now, that it runs all of that. So I mean, literally all of the world that you're on and working with is open source, is relying on some degree of open source technology,
which is amazing. I don't know if, I don't think most people know what open source is, and I certainly don't know if people realize that. I don't know if, I think a lot of open source projects that, well, a lot of, I mean, I guess if you can think of if you subdivide open source projects into sponsor-led and community-led, I don't know if any project is really truly community-led, but with
there's Debian with Linux is completely community-led. I mean, there are some. I mean, I guess they have
Drupal
some.
was fairly community. It's a fairly communitarian open source. There's at various points there have been thousands of people actively contributing to the code base, and there certainly was the potential, the kind of meritocratic potential for individual contributors, developers, to make their mark and make their name and have influence on the project just by contributing, as opposed to being connected. Whereas with WordPress, it's more driven by a single for-profit company. Not that that's a bad thing, but with Automatic, Matt Mullenweg kind of leading that project in a more centralized way, which is also fine too. But there is, I think in both places, I think this is, I think this is true. Like, I think there's a sense that we're in this together, as kind of end users and contributors, and we'll help one another. And I think that's a good sign for Web3, because with NFTs in particular, you've got what looks like, I've watched it really closely over the last year. I watched it. I'm kind of thinking now as through my consulting work, I had a client, an NFT client before the big NFT boom, like before Beeple sold his montage at Christie's for 67 million or whatever it was. His dailies, yeah. So his mosaic of dailies. So I would say one of the biggest trends is this massive corporate investment in Web3, which I actually think is sort of like a Trojan horse, because I mean, I think it's kind of like the reaction to a new technology trend or platform. So with TikTok is to try to monopolize it. The reaction from the centralized authorities, in other words, big corporations and governments, right? So Biden monopolizes targets 30 huge influencers on TikTok to help the war effort in Ukraine, and Ford and GE are minting NFTs. So it looks like there's a corporate takeover, but that's the beauty of web3 is that you can't take over what you don't own. You can't own. It's not, which is a little bit different than web 2 and web 1. So I don't know if it's hard to wrap your mind around it, but those are some like bright spots, I guess, on the horizon.
I never thought of it as a Trojan horse. So, okay, I'm going to say it because we can throw it around and just to define it in case no one knows what it is. NFT stands for non-fungible token. Really what that means is a receipt. That's all it is. It's a digital receipt. It's a digital receipt that says a certain wallet, which is essentially a place that owns and stores what can be exchanged on the network, which is tokens. Bitcoin is one of the tokens, or the NFT in this case is, most NFTs are on the Ethereum blockchain, which means, for example, I say that there's this web address somewhere that has a picture and a GIF or a video or something, and then I write that address to the blockchain, and it's who owns it, who can control it is this person at this certain wallet address, and then it gets sold, and then that means somebody else now owns that receipt of digital object, right? So that's what an NFT is, and having it as a concept, having this concept of a Trojan horse is interesting, and I think you might be right, actually, and I think the driver of it is the same capitalistic corporate, modern corporate idea of the same one that's like offshoring. Like I'm going to offshore, my manufacturing processes to somewhere where it's cheaper labor and I don't get tagged with pollution, which just means even more cheaper. And then so long as I can ship it, at a cost savings, even with the higher expense of shipping it, I'll make money, and that's fine. Never mind the fact that I'm destabilizing, my home country or home region, where this is, because what does that matter to me? I'm more caring about the money. Where in this case, it's very similar mindset, which is I'm going to sell something on here because this is where the new money is, and there seems to be some action here. So I'm going to put money into these NFTs, thinking I'm going to grow a market, grow my market, and potentially, monopolize a certain corner of the this new economy. But really, what it is it's legitimizing the exchange and use of this new digital, economy, really, which then just perpetuates other people using it. And if other people learn about it and they get attracted to it, they'll learn that, well, the difference between this one and the world before is now you can make something that looks like a Disney NFT, or you can use something along those lines, and now you can sell it on there. Yeah, that's interesting. I like the idea of a Trojan horse.
Yeah, if you add up all the sports teams and media companies and so on, that from the global Fortune 5,000, how many wallets have they induced the creation of among how many millions of people who at one point are going to realize, oh, I can just exchange NFTs with some other not anonymous person that makes something cool because I like it. I don't really care whether. So that's which gets into the branding discussion and the perception of value.
Everything is branding now, though.
Everything is branding.
Right. So like I'm really good at branding. I'm actually I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I am really good with branding, but I suck in branding on the web. And the reason is because I just don't give a fuck. Like I don't give a fuck about promoting the brand. I'm really good at making a brand. Right. But I don't give a fuck about promoting it because I don't care about attention. Right. But the reason I'm trying to say that is because I think about branding constantly. And so I see it out there. And what I'm trying to say is that our entire economy right now is based off of branding. This whole Instagram influencer, the world is a stage. I'll bring it up again. The world is a stage right now, and more so than ever it has been, which is if you can create a brand for yourself, an angle, a character that can then get picked up and go viral, that means you can now make money. But the thing with Web3 that's so interesting to me is that you create a brand and now you're in control of the price around it. You just have to figure out a way of commodifying it, which in some
That's right. It
ways,
forces you to learn the art of creating a brand.
right, but a commodity. It forces you to think about how to make a brand into a commodity, is what it is.
Into
That's the asterisk I put to it. So in some ways, Web3 is more capitalistic while also being more anarchistic, because anyone can participate in it. It's trustless,
it
but
induces commoditization in the pure sense of the word, not like commodities like wheat and salt, but like in the pure sense of productization of
right.
things.
And in our new economy, it's knowledge.
Right. Yeah, it's knowledge, and it's packaging of knowledge. I mean, that's kind of what branding is. I'll tell you a true story from the trenches of NFT marketing. I won't name the client, but I had a client that was wanting to put their brand into people's minds. And one of their solutions was kind of an old school way of doing that, which is to hire PR web. So PR web is like it's a service that distributes press releases for you online. And it's not so much a way of contacting or getting the brand in front of people as it is lending legitimacy to a brand, which is because it costs money to use PR web. And for the second reason, which was really interesting to me, so PR web rejected the business outright. They wouldn't do it. And I called them actually on behalf of my client, and I talked to them about it. I spoke to a really smart woman who worked for PR Web, and I said, why aren't you doing this? And I said, is it because it's Web3, it's like blockchain or NFT? And she said, no, that's not it. We work with clients like that, but basically it's because we reviewed the business's website, and it doesn't feel like a reputable, trustworthy brand. Like that's it. Isn't that funny? So the foundation of Web 1 and Web 1, the website, needs to convey the brand for a Web3 initiative project. She said it doesn't have all these classic hallmarks of Web 1. I don't have founder bios. I don't have advisors. I don't have an about page. I don't have like a full description. Like the work hasn't been done on this website. You haven't put the time and work. It doesn't feel real. It feels like you just threw up a web page on WordPress.com or something, or Weebly. And she said, we don't do that. We don't work with clients like that. All of the press releases that we run, if you look at the website that for the company for whom we're distributing a press release, it looks professional. It feels, you can trust it. And it's true. And I looked into it. I looked at the 21 examples they gave me of other NFT and crypto projects. And yes, the websites were very well done. Excellent UX, good writing, trustworthy, good design. So it is about creating the brand, and in terms of like, the business side of introducing an NFT project, sometimes you can get away with doing it if you have a famous name. Then you don't need to worry about the website, right? If you're Beeple, or if you're Banksy, or Tim Ferriss, you can just use Weebly or Wix. But if you're not, then you need to do the work of branding, which is funny because I mean it kind of goes to what you're saying, which is that Web3 is, if we're going to take market share from Ford and GE and Disney, like people have to get really good at branding.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like that example is like the interface between an emerging technology and the legacy. capital, right? Which is
Yeah.
interesting because if you grow up now and you're embedded in this Web3 world, I mean, you just look at the things that they've written. Like, what have they sold? Like, what, if it's an NFT thing, like, what have they generated? What are their other NFTs? Who've bought them? You know what I mean? You can just
Yeah.
like look at the network, right? And be
Yeah.
like, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh,
Right.
okay. And then that's truly trustless because it's like, I don't care what your website looks like. I want to see the work, right? Which goes back to proof of work, which is like a whole concept with Bitcoin, right? Which is interesting.
Yeah. And that's what we should be talking about. It's just
Yes,
that
yes, which is no,
that's what
it's
we should be talking
interesting.
about. You're right.
Yes, which is interesting
It's
in this
interesting that
case
there's,
because the trust that they're getting is just from a website. And it's like, dude, anybody can make a fake website that meets all 21 of your examples as criteria. And then you're only like
yeah.
smell test is going through that as opposed to like actually looking at the code. It's like some startups that I've worked on where it's like they tell me this big game, they have this awesome set of things. Okay, there was one that I was consulting with actually that like I I ghosted them. I totally just stopped responding to their emails because I kind of like did a cost factor analysis of like how long it would be for me to continue explaining my point through emails, and I was like, I'm just not even going to respond anymore. Um,
Yep.
which I somewhat feel bad about, but also at the same time, it's like I feel like my time is valuable, and every time I have 10 minutes to like send a message, I think like I'd rather spend that 10 minutes petting my dog or going for a walk or something
Don't
like that.
deprive your dog.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, anyways, they had this idea of like AI and integrating AI on a blockchain, and the idea was cool. But they sent me these decks, like these like walking decks of like what they were pitching investors with, and I was giving them feedback on it, which is a very Web 1.0 kind of thing, right? Like I'm looking at your
Mhm.
presentation decks in this analogy, right? And there was like a bunch of things misspelled. And I'm dyslexic. So if I'm catching that you have misspellings, that's saying something. And like, just like fonts were off and things like that. And like, I was like, okay, I'm going to give these guys the benefit of the doubt. But like, they sent me that as like a, get to know it. And I was like, cool. Now can I see your code? And they were squirrely about it. And I was like, no, come on, let me look at it. Like, I'll sign an NDA, like whatever you want. Like, do you have it? And they wouldn't let me look at it. I was like, okay, fine. I don't need to look at it. But what have you done? Like, what have you gotten done as far as your
Mhm.
concept? And they want to give me any answers, which I know is startup speak for we don't have anything that works or we don't have anything at all. Right. Right. But like,
They
if
have
I
like Figma drawings or something.
maybe even not even that, because I didn't see any Figma in their decks. They just had these like, Google Sheets or Google Slides, type of slideware. But my point is that I was looking for the proof of work. I was like, show me
Yeah.
what you've done, right?
Yeah.
But they raised a couple million, and they raised a couple million through like a crypto token sale, right? And
Oh wow.
so they got money, but they got money off of just on walking decks alone and network of people, right? So
Yeah.
like, but in a Web3 type of world, somebody can just be like, oh, I made this app. This app does this thing. I have it on this test chain. Go take it out on this test chain. You can actually see what it's doing. Even if I've never written anything to a real blockchain in the real world, no one's using it. I can still show
Mhm.
you proof of what's been going on, which gives me so much more hope for as far as like the future. If we start thinking about things in this type of, see, like to me, I think the interesting
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
about Web3 is also the thing that makes it hard to access for most people right now. I think because it's convoluted and complicated, and it's like you have to think about the technology to really understand what the difference is, which is a high barrier of entry to people, right? I think that really is
Yeah.
like, I don't think people understand how the magnetic strips on a VHS tape work, but they understand they plug something in and it works. And there hasn't been quite the simple UX for both a use case and an app for Web3 yet to get that across. I think it's coming. I don't think it's quite there yet, which is why we're still talking about something really in its early stages. And then the other part of it is, like, like people with Web3, there's a community aspect of it, which is you kind of spoke to, right? Which
Mhm.
means it's going to attract people who are really excited and get to interface and work with other people and build things. But it's also going to attract people who are looking for a community. And I think that those two
Yeah.
aspects of it make it difficult. You have people who are like NFTs are the future and they're crazy and they're awesome. And I'm going to go buy a bunch of them. It's like, won't shut up about it. And I mean, they are cool, but a lot of it right now is hype, right? We haven't really seen what's
Mm-hmm.
really possible with it yet. So that community kind of makes things opaque. And then also it's like, I have to understand
Yeah.
this technology, which is difficult to understand. But through all of these things, you're actually able to have something that has more trust than even your example of, I'm just going to look at your website. I can just look to see what you've done, which is really
Mm-hmm.
cool. And then on top of that, somebody can just enter the space and get to work in it, as opposed to even now, which, I mean, with some examples with you, I mean, I can now think of 100 other examples. Like if I put my client work up with a blockchain, it's like, and even if it's just me saying I did this work and the client signs off on it and I made an NFT out there, and it's a proof that I built some
Interesting.
app for somebody. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
an interesting way of expressing how
That's
that was
like
done.
case study, Web3 case study.
Yeah, which is really fascinating. And yeah, I'm gonna think about what I just
Yeah,
came up
it's a
with right
good
now
idea.
later. Yeah, it's
I like
interesting.
that. Yeah, it's and that's the advice. I met someone that I think I would say was, you know, behaving more so in good faith in the startup I mentioned, that wouldn't put the work into doing, because there, even with Web 2 and Web 1, there's value in doing the work. But so, I met someone who wanted to and has wanted to build something valuable in the Web3 world, not having a technical background. And I think so many questions. And I think, I think the focus for that person is, do the work in Web3 and let that be what speaks for you. If you don't have connections, you don't have much of a Web 2 profile or presence. There's a really funny, I don't know, have you heard of a musical artist named Alex Cameron?
No.
He's got a funny song, kind of ironically, like calling out his adversary for not having a web presence. You don't even have a web presence. But which is a hilarious concept. It's like, do you even lift?
Yeah, I know, it's like a rap battle. That's what I was thinking of.
But yeah, like you're saying, like it's, I think you're right. It's Web3 is in a really, really early place. I do think of, from my experiences with it so far, particularly with the NFT world, which is really new, like 3 years old or so. I think it's worthwhile to look at it as long term. And if you have that baseline assumption that the way to go from nothing to creating value in Web3 is to play the long game, then building something is the key. Build an OpenSea profile, just learn how to mint an NFT on OpenSea without spending $300 in Ethereum gas fees, because you figure out a different way to mint an NFT on OpenSea, and go from there. build slowly, and fill out the world. And I don't consider myself really an expert in Web3 at all. I just happen to have experienced it kind of arbitrarily. But I do think that is what we should be talking about, is that there's that transparency in terms of what someone actually has done is easily available to us because of the nature of Web3. I think that's really cool. I think that's great.
Yeah, and okay, so I'll tell you like one of the use cases I wanted to bring up with talking with you. So there's like the new features of Web3. So like some of them is there's two things I wanted to bring up. One is smart contracts, which is essentially saying there's protocols that you can write into the network that when conditions are met, something happens. So like an NFT is a good example. I make an NFT art piece. You, Rowan, purchase my NFT art piece for 100 ETH, right? We'll just make it easy, round numbers, okay? I have a thing on it, a smart contract written to it that, okay, so if I sell you a piece of physical art at Sotheby's Sotheby's takes a portion of it. I get the remainder. Now, if that person who owns it sells it at Sotheby's again, the artist doesn't get anything, right? Sotheby's takes some, and now this new owner gets something, right? A lot of times, artwork, when an artist makes something, their early stuff sells for a lot of money because it's their early stuff, right? And then, they don't make any of that money back. But if I do it as an NFT, I can write into the smart contract that 20% of all sales goes back to me, right? So I sell it to you for 100 ETH. You sell it back to somebody else for 200 ETH. Well, that means I get 20 ETH out of that, right? Because I get that 20%. So that's one thing, smart contracts, which is, it's so fundamentally radical, dude. Like if I build an API right now that says that I'll sell you my, I'm building a home automation system. So I have like a thermostat that I built that's outside that is streaming me the weather outside, and like the weather forecast, and it does a couple other things. So it calculates the phase of the moon. It's going to start getting wild once I get a couple more hours. So if I sell that data to some warehouse, some weather warehouse of getting, individual weather data, down to like a street level, which is quite valuable actually. If I sell that, that means I have to build an API that is accessible to their API, which has the right tokens. In this case, it's like, authentication tokens that says security layers. I can send you information. The information I sent you, can be traced back to who is sending it. And then it's only the information you're asking for. And if I try to give you more, it'll error out and nothing will happen. It'll just, it's ephemeral at that point. It will go away. Or other than maybe some like error log that's saved somewhere. Where with the smart contracts, it means I just have to know how data is written onto this network. And then I can add any other conditions or things to it, which is essentially saying, instead of having an API, which is a one-to-one, one network to another network, exchange, well, the network is the exchange, which is just radically different. Like that right there is totally different. So there's that part of it, but the other part of it is wallets, right? So I think smart contracts is huge, but the other part of it that I wanted to bring up to you was wallets. So if I have a wallet, which is like a store of tokens, right? And it has an address, which is very similar to like a web address. It's an address on that token. And it says, this is, my information. There's, a public key, a private key, and then a cryptographic phrase. It's 24 words stringed together, which is essentially your password. And then your private key is something you don't want. Your private key and your passphrases you don't want to give out. Like very, very big no-nos. Anyone can get it. Get access to it then. It's essentially like giving the keys to your house. And then, the exact location of your house, or, what doors, use what keys, right? It's like getting your keychain and then knowing what doors know what keys. But then you have a public address, which is what you use to exchange. In a future, if we're taking the long game here, there's a future world that I can envision that is not just my vision, but what a lot of people talk about with this, where instead of having usernames and passwords and email addresses that are attached to your, Figma account and your Gmail account and your, YouTube account, all of those things. Instead of having all of that, you could just have a wallet. So if I'm on Odyssey, which is a open source blockchain built YouTube clone, if I'm on there and I'm getting ads, those ads and any type of tokenization, like that basic attention token I was talking about, go towards a wallet address that because that was my way I signed in, right? But now if I go to another place like Siegel, which is like a Substack clone that's built on the Lightning Network, right? If I go to Siegel, well, now my login is a wallet again. So I can go to multiple places on the internet and not have to worry about my login, right? Not have to worry about it getting hacked, because as long as I don't give out that 20-word phrase or 24-word phrase, no one can get in. So it's more trustworthy, more secure, and I don't have to think about having a bunch of 100 different passwords and logins and things, and then what are they tracking me on? Because I should be more. The other thing, part of it is like the paradox of the moment, which is it's more secure, but if you get hacked, you're fucked, and that whole wallet is fucked.
That's right.
And you have to probably be more careful with, doing a little bit of research on the sites, which you should be doing anyways, to be honest. Like, are they siphoning my information? Are they, surveilling me? All that stuff.
Right.
But through doing that, you get something that is a profoundly better user experience and actually profoundly more secure should you play within the game of security properly.
Yeah, more secure and more authentically owned, I would say, like much more like more truly possessed. I think with email, it's a great vision that you're proposing, where the wallet, we have a paradigm where the wallet becomes the authentication, as opposed to this right now we have this mishmash where you have the email address and the smartphone, or basically those two are like the kind of like core forms of identification. Like with Slack and Substack, you basically they don't want you to log in with the username and password. They want you to request a magic link in your email address, and so you have to prove that you own the email address or you have the password to it.
But see, they're doing that though, because then they can tie that email address to other accounts, which means they can sell that data, and then that data can be merged somewhere to understand that Rowan, who owns this email address that's on the Slack account, likes to play basketball. And then from that, they can sell you, the Bulls are playing an exhibition game in Berlin, right? You know what I mean? They could, that data can be joined. That's why they're doing that.
They can connect it to something else, which they can't necessarily do, or maybe not. They can only do if you let them do it with a crypto wallet. I think.
But they see, they could though know that you have this crypto wallet. They could know you have this crypto wallet, and they could know that this crypto wallet has exchanged on these other places, these other websites, and have written to the chain from that, right? They could have a record
if you let them.
Well, no, it's on the chain. So like your activities is just open. It's on the chain. There could be some hashing that like hides the wallet and hides the transactions and all of that stuff. But they could know some more about you, right? But them knowing the intimate details of your life is no longer possible to them.
Yeah, right. But where I was going with, if you let them, I was referencing the phenomenon I think we're seeing I think is here to stay, which is that people tend to have lots of wallets, lots of crypto wallets.
Yep.
I mean, I think in the future there's going to be a version of 1Password that's like one wallet, one wallet that holds. This is probably already out there. So again, I'm not tracking the tokenomics. I'm not tracking.
Yeah, I don't know how to tokenize.
There's tokenomics, but
there you go. Tokenomics.
So so you could you use one. I mean, it might come down to where you're using one wallet to interface with, which is already happening, right? You use one wallet to interface with one blockchain, and for whatever reason, you've opened up a wallet on Metaverse, you've opened up a wallet at Top Shots, you've opened up a wallet on all these other places. So you end up with 65 wallets, and maybe in 10 years you'll have 700 wallets, and you'll manage them all with like a wallet manager. I don't know.
But see, the thing is that you could eventually consolidate those wallets to another wallet. So you have 50 wallets across all these different places. You can just transfer their assets to another wallet.
Yeah, true.
Right. So like you can go have all these wallets that are like interfacing, and then you can transfer everything there. Because I also envision a day where like, okay, I don't play video games, but let's just lie to ourselves for a minute and say I play video games. I have all these cool skins on Fortnite. I also have, some cool shots on Top Shot. I also, have some type of crazy profile on Civilization. And I've bought in all of these NFTs of basketball games. I can envision like some type of interface where I consolidate all of those transactions into one wallet, and then someone can now see my profile and be like, oh my God, this guy's got all this cool shit. Like he's got like an NFT skin on Fortnite. He's got this cool gun skin. He's, you know what I mean? He bought Dirk Nowitzki's fadeaway shot. Like, like all of this stuff, they could just see it on there. So yeah, you probably will. I mean, even the Brave example where I have all these different wallets, like I could consolidate those all to a single wallet, and then I would know how much bat I'm making every month. I don't, because
Right.
it's just not useful to me. I don't really care. Once I start like logging in with like Siegel and stuff, which I probably will start writing on there and things.
Which you can't do if you have multiple email addresses. So, but yeah, but the other point too about the security side and the ownership side is that the de facto reality is that most people's email accounts are managed by centralized authorities. In other words, big corporations. Literally most email accounts in use are one of two companies, the majority from Google or Microsoft. So that gives you that in itself, the divorcing your reliance on those technologies for authentication is in of itself a form of self-empowerment, I suppose, in like a real sense.
Totally.
So I love your overview of smart contracts too. I think that's great. I mean, I think I'm with you. I think that's that's kind of like the path I think to follow in terms of how NFTs in particular will start to, well, that is a feature of it, and that's something that's particular to NFTs, like how they could be more and more useful, and also how they can enforce a wider array of social contracts between humans. So there's one of the cool features of smart contracts that I like is the ability for an NFT to be owned by multiple people. So, the really simplistic example, an NFT that might be worth, if you translate to fiat numbers, it might be worth, say, $10,000 because it's like a piece of Banksy art or something. You can't afford it. I mean, you could, in theory, share ownership with 1,000 strangers on the internet for $10, and then you own part of this. You've invested in this piece of Banksy art. That's a really simplistic example, but that's a great feature. I think that the potential of certifying ownership of real estate, that's the big one, right? Because in the scope of human history, property rights and the enforcement of property rights has been really transformative, especially, well, I don't know, but I was gonna point to the Western world, especially the kind of early enforcement of like fine-grained property rights in Anglo cultures. I think was a big deal historically, because it created kind of complex and sophisticated assets for lots and lots of people where they didn't have them before. So if you can, I mean, I know that there's been some kind of showcase publicity-based examples of someone, I can't remember who it was. Someone, I think it was it who's the guy, the guy who owns TechCrunch, Huffington, the founder of, no, not Reid Hoffman. I'm thinking of, can't remember, his name escapes me, but he sold an apartment actually in Kiev. It was about 6 months ago. He sold an apartment in Kiev as an NFT. So he exchanged an NFT. I mean, of course, at the same time, he also sold it through the traditional mechanisms where you transfer a deed that is recognized by the jurisdictional authorities. So, escaping from that, I think is good. It's probably, it seems like a long way off, but you never know. I mean, I don't know.
It's so funny. Like this is now, maybe it's the universe trying to tell me something. I'm being somewhat hyperbolic by that, but shortly before I met you, actually, I almost took a job being the product person, which in tech speak means the person that like is responsible for getting the building the thing, and
Mm-hmm.
making it successful, right? That's really what that means for a real estate conglomerate and titling company that wanted to do real estate titling on blockchain. And then
Oh, wow.
I came up with the blockchain interview I did with Dr. Marav Azer. Um, and it comes up quite a bit because it seems so obvious, like a great use case, which I think it really is, but you just have to have the trust in the 1.0 world, kind of like
Mm-hmm.
what you were saying with like actually like titling and all that isn't even 1.0. It's not even on the web. It's all physical contracts and pieces of paper and things like that. You know what I mean? Like it hasn't even made it digital yet. So that whole thing, it makes a
That's right.
perfect case for blockchain, but we're talking about an industry that isn't. But what this makes me think about is um like physical property is becoming more and more and more expensive. And now that you have like um interest rates so low, and the kind of the COVID wave, what you see like very much globally is that people purchase homes, and because money was cheap, the homes sold for more money than they were necessarily going to be worth. But now we're at a
Mm-hmm.
point where the supply is so low of homes that those houses are not going to go down in price, even if inflation or even if interest rates go up. And then you have the entry of like BlackRock, and then the failed experiment from Zillow of like actually purchasing homes. So that's like corporate money coming in. So it's inflating the price of it, which is to say, that like property ownership is becoming expensive. And owning property used to be the surest way of Americans having intergenerational wealth. And now I wonder,
Yeah.
it's sparking this whole like, well, is there digital ownership that you can have as a way of like, conglomerating tiny little assets that build on top of each other, that eventually,
Right.
become wealth that you can transfer to be something real and tangible in your own life and in your reality. But honestly, dude, the two things of Web3 that I think are going to be the most revolutionary, outside of just building apps on Web3 and this decentralized network, is going to be decentralized autonomous organizations and smart contracts. And
Yeah.
decentralized autonomous organizations are just essentially a network built on top of smart contracts that say that there's some mechanism of getting shit done, of doing some
Mm-hmm.
things, making some transactions, that through the act of getting shit done has some type of checks and balances of people saying yes to it or voting, or some degree of an autonomous organization that has the rules of how it's autonomous and organized together, um, can actually move to get things done. I think that is going to be, I mean, dude,
Which
like,
which again reminds one of the autonomous self-governing communities of open source software builders around the world
yes,
agreeing to the same rules and standards and terminologies, dictionary definitions, so that they could work together and accomplish things.
the only
It's a
difference of this,
similar model.
very similar, but now the rules of it is written that everybody can see, and it's in a protocol, which really just means a syntax that everyone can
Yeah.
understand and read to. It's giving the internet a dictionary and lexicon and syntax to say these are the ways, these are some of the tools you can use, you can extend them in these ways, go out and build shit with it. I mean, honestly, this conversation is making me think more and more about how really what Web3 is it's
But
creating a syntax for exchanging information.
yeah, it's creating an automatable. So like because I think
Programmable.
the a programmable syntax, because that syntax does exist. Like in the specific case of Drupal.org, everything is public. Everything is on the Drupal.org website. A, a Web 2.0 asset, including the rules of engagement, how you talk to each other, how you feel about things, how you think about things. It's all codified. All the behavior for um, how this de facto kind of Web 2.0 DAO, how it gets things done is there, but a DAO has an advantage over an open source software community because, yeah, like it's got programmable protocols that eliminate a lot of ambiguity and probably create a lot more efficiency and actually let you just build faster and get more done and create more with less, I guess.
Yeah, I would say the difference is instead of it having some type of documentation online that's dry and probably long in order to understand like how to do things
Yes.
in that code base, and then you submit things and then someone comments on the code and says like, don't do it this way, do it this way, this doesn't work, so on and so forth. Where in this other world, you could just get a bunch of error messages that say like, nope, that doesn't work and this is why. Nope, that doesn't work and this is why. It's a more
Yeah.
of a conversational like exchange, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to like a library like exchange where I'm, reading this document and trying to figure it out on my own and understand how to work with it. And, maybe I get
Yeah.
into some chat room or something like that, where in this case, I can get into a chat room totally. But if I just learn how smart contracts are written, the language is written in, and if I understand that, I could just read these contracts and just
Yeah.
understand how it works and how to interface with it and start building with it.
I don't want to hijack where you're going with DAOs because I think that's huge. I do agree that the DAO, the social contract are kind of it from what we can tell now where to pay attention to in terms of Web3, in terms of NFT in particular. I like the concept of DeFi. I like the concept of DeFi as a way to emulate what traditional investment platforms offer, but in a decentralized way. So you're cutting out the corporate middleman when you're investing and buying things, so you can set up an entire market that is composed of a set of smart contracts that you can interact with to invest in the world, I guess. I think there's another social impact of Web3 in general, blockchain in general, that I want to just run this by you to get your thoughts on this. So there's this saying that Google never forgets. Well, I think that's total bullshit. I think Google's purpose is to make money, not to not forget. So they're only going to remember as
The
long as
NSA would
there's
like to have a call. They'd like to have a chat.
they're only going to remember things if it's interesting to them. And not only
It's all
that,
interesting to
but
them.
we're seeing a phenomenon now. Well, but if it's profitable, if it's so not just remember, but make that memory accessible to us if it's profitable to them. So then maybe they never forget, but if we can't access it, who cares? If it's sitting, it's sitting in an encrypted database and there's no like interface with the information, Google does forget as far as I'm concerned. So I don't like that saying. I don't think it's
But it
true.
doesn't though.
What
It
do you
doesn't.
mean?
It doesn't. It doesn't forget.
Well,
So Google's like the way that their entire monetization and surveillance strategy is set up is to create the most ephemeral, experiences, impactful in the smallest amount of time possible. Which the way that they do that is by having deep learning, which means it takes a massive amount of information, and it tries to draw the most amount of connections, and then the most amount of connections that it creates, it then uses to generate a probability of what you're most likely to do based off of that ephemeral experience. So like if I'm serving you up search results, I want to give you search results that are twofold. I want to shoot two different aims. One aim is I want to give you ones that'll keep you interacting, coming back, and feed your use of this platform. And then two, I want to have you drive you to the experiences that create the most amount of money for me, which means if I know more information and more data from you, the more that it will be able to serve you things to a degree. So if you have a series of photos in your Google Photos from 5 years ago that are you with your dog, it's not going to forget that you have those, and it's going to use those to serve you up ads. And then if you never click on dog ones, then it will have that linking but it won't
And
weigh it as
and
high.
if you lose your device that you had 5 years ago,
Doesn't matter, dude.
it will.
Doesn't matter.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. So, I buy your premise, and I think that's an important premise. And I'm not fully aware of it, so it's interesting to hear you talk about it. But I completely accept that it's in their interest to actually not forget. What I meant by attacking the premise is that what the premise supposedly means to the average user, is the average person on the street, is that the Google interface that you can search and easily look at never forgets. But that's actually what I'm taking issue with. I think it's actually because of I think what's presented to you as an end user isn't complete. And I think it's focused on the present. It's focused on the ephemeral experiences you're talking about that are present based. I think that I think actually, for example, there's someone did a study on this. The guy, what's this? I'll dig up the website. It's something votes. There's a vote tracking website. So this guy gave a talk. He did research on political articles and data accumulated and published on the web in the aughts. A lot of it's not available anymore, just not available. So like, if you look at a New York Times article from 2013, which states, doesn't just imply, but states that Assad staged a chemical weapons attack within his own country. That's what you used to see when you Googled it and when you read it. But now if you go to the article, it's been changed because it's irrefutable evidence that it was false flag has come out that forced the New York Times to retract that. So that's the problem with, where I'm going is that the problem with Web 1 and Web 2 is that because Google's searchable index of Web 1 and Web 2 can be easily manipulated and erased, it's as if Google does forget in terms of the end user experience, even though
the end user experience. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The
but
end
with
user,
Web 3,
it forgets.
For the end user, it forgets or so
which is really hoodwinking
prevents
you
memory.
And it's hoodwinking you and manipulating you, right?
It is.
Yeah, it's lulling you to forget. It's actually making you forget is what it's doing.
But John, I want to go on the blockchain in 2013 and see exactly what the New York Times wrote about Assad supposedly conducting chemical weapons attacks. That's one of I think there's a social benefit to Web3 too that I think could be really important in terms of cataloging information, because we have this problem of erasing the web. We have a Web 2.0 and Web 1.0 has a big problem, which is we erase the past, even the past from 5 years ago or 10 years ago, especially. We're so focused on the present. So I hope that is a benefit. I mean, there's other drawbacks to just continually accumulating data. There's the ecological impact. Do we recreate the difference engine somehow? Are you familiar with the difference engine? The book about the cyberpunk book with William Gibson, that William Gibson co-authored, where with Neil Stephenson, where they create a digital computer with steam engine.
No, but that sounds right up my alley. No.
Yeah. So maybe we'll have to do that to create an ecological Web3. But the whole argument,
I don't know.
I'm bracketing the whole argument that Web3 is less eco than Web 2. I mean, that's
no. I mean, I think that's like fundamentally flawed. I also think that everything creates energy. And I think the incredible revolution with even Bitcoin is it's commoditizing energy and energy storage and energy generation past the point of it being done. And because it's actually putting a value on just running energy. It's creating really interesting things where if you look at I can't think of the basin right now, but if you look in North Dakota, the fracking that's happening there, if you actually look at a image of it at night, it looks lit up as if it's like a massive megacity. The whole state of North Dakota and part of South Dakota, it's just It's incredibly bright. And the reason is because of all of the flare. Like when you frack, you're going to have excess natural gas that's going to come out that you can't capture. So what they do is they just burn it, and they just have a pipe that's just burning the excess. energy. Well, what now Amco is doing is they're now going to start partnering with Intel to create Bitcoin mining rigs. So instead of burning the energy and doing nothing with it, they're going to still burn the energy, but they're going to use it to power Bitcoin mining, which so they're actually going to be making money off of it and then feeding into the Bitcoin network with energy that would be wasted otherwise. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that because you're actually creating an incentive for green energy or more efficient use of energy. So, I mean, does it cost energy, and is it demanding more energy than what we currently have in the grid? Yes, but it's also going to force innovation. And really what we should be talking about is making more smarter use of energy rather than doing that. But we bracketed.
We bracketed big time.
I do have to go, but this is always a pleasure.
Sure. No, and we left it on an interesting point. I also have to go, and I don't regret a single bracket.
Neither do I. This is fun. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for bracketing with me. My pleasure, John. It's been super interesting, and thank you for all the ideas. I'll follow up with some notes that would be helpful for your show notes. But man, very interesting conversation.
Yeah, always a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.